Okay.
Meeting called to order at 5:03 p.m.
Okay, welcome everyone to the June 18th, 2025 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. As a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any type of noise devices. Also, a few reminders regarding public comments. Individuals who would like to address the board, a request to speak card must be given to the assistant clerk before the announcement of the item. If you would like to speak on an item not listed on the agenda or consent calendar, you must do so under public forum. Please refer to the Rent Board meeting agenda for the list of items or agenda items list open for public comment posted above the table located in front of the chambers. Also, this meeting is being interpreted. We ask anyone addressing the board to please speak clearly and slowly for interpretation. The first item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The next item on the agenda is roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Espinosa.
Present.
Board Member Height.
Here.
Vice Chair Cantor.
Here.
Chair Tipton.
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Here.
And General Counsel Charles Oshanuka.
Here.
For the record, all Rent Board members and staff are present. The next item on the agenda is statement of conflict of interest. Are there any? Okay, hearing none. The next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are a couple of typos that I wanted to mention that are in the agenda packet. So the first is under item G1, under the background paragraph, page 1, in the first sentence, the letter I was combined with the year. That has been corrected on your packet, so you should have the corrected version. Item I1, page 6 of 6, we changed the title to start with update instead of updated, and below the title, the second sentence, we changed it to read settled through a cooperation agreement. To provide the board members with the corrected copy, we have provided board members with a corrected copy, and we'll make the necessary changes on the website. And that's it.
I have a question about the order of items, specifically about the contract approvals that are for fiscal year 25 to 26, and I'm just wondering about the order of operations of approving those contracts prior to budget approval, and whether it would make sense / is possible to have consent calendar come at the end of the meeting instead of the beginning of the meeting. So I think that's primarily a question for Charles.
So my recommendation would be just to move those specific items, if you want to have them heard after the budget's adopted, just to move those specific ones from the consent calendar to the back of the agenda.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm wondering what your opinion is on, like, if it's appropriate to approve contracts for fiscal year 26 prior to approving that year's budget. Is there any issue that we could run into by doing that? Would it be protective of the program to move those items to the end, or is it okay procedurally to do it in?
I think legally it's fine, but just as a practical matter, if you want to be careful, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Practically speaking, it makes more sense to first approve the allocated amounts in a budget and then approve the contracts.
Yeah.
Just order of operations wise. So probably sounds a little bit more prudent to do it that way, the way you're suggesting.
And it's not possible to just move the entire consent calendar to the end of the meeting?
There's no rule that prevents you from doing that. I guess in chapter 3 of the regulations, it requires that the consent be heard first. And so what you would do is you would vote to suspend that rule temporarily and then just move the entire F consent calendar to the end of the agenda. So you could do it if you wanted to.
Okay, yeah, because I'm looking at it and there are 5 contract amendments that are for this fiscal year, and I don't have a particular interest in having those be heard individually. So could I, Chair, may I make a motion to?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that it's the chair's discretion though, right? Or do we make a motion?
You have to make a motion to suspend the rule.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to suspend the rules regarding the when in the meeting the consent calendar is heard, and to have the consent calendar heard and voted on at the end of the meeting instead of the first item in the meeting.
Is there a second?
I second.
Uh-oh.
Everybody seconds.
Who second first?
It's either Tomasa or
Board Member Espinoza? Okay. Okay, I'll take a vote. Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor?
Yes.
And Chair Tipton?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes to suspend the rules for the consent calendar, to move the consent calendar to the end of the meeting, and also addressing the items that Executive Director mentioned, item G1, clerical errors for item G1 and item I1. Motion passes unanimous.
Okay. Are there any further changes to the agenda from staff?
No further changes.
Are there any further changes to the agenda from the board?
Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is public forum. Tonight, we have one speaker. The speaker shall be allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board. When your name is called, please address the board, stating your name and city. Residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. The only speaker is Mr. Cordell Hindler. Go ahead.
Yeah, so good evening, Chair Tipton, board members. For the record, I am Cordell Hendler, and I'm a Richmond resident. So I have 4 things to say to you today. So number one is, as I was looking through the agenda packets from the past, it kind of concerns me that that having the hearings, you know, in a regular meeting sounds a little bit premature, because I had suggested to have special meetings just to devote to the public hearings, so that way it would be helpful to have it keep it separated from the regular agenda. So that would be helpful in moving forward. So that's one observation. Then the second one is, as far as the vacancy, there is a vacancy on this board. So tentatively scheduled, it will appear on the upcoming council agenda for August. So once I get more information, I will present the board with someone to be filled that last seat. So I'll get more information at a later time. But here comes the good news. So coming up on September the 4th, you are all invited to the Contra Costa Mayor's Conference hosted by the city of El Cerrito. I will provide more information by the August meeting, so I'll get more information. But you must RSVP ahead, so that way they will do a count of how many people are attending. And it's still $70, and that includes dinner. So I'll get more information at the August meeting. So, and let's see, what else? Oh yeah, the 4th thing I had mentioned is, like, you know, I had put an agenda item forward to you for next month is to recognize our previous rent board members, because I had requested it 3 times, and I'm hoping that it will be appearing on either next month or August agenda. So I'm hoping that the board will put that in on the next agenda. That would be wonderful. So that's it.
That was the only speaker. All right, so now we're moving to item G1. Item G1 is under regulations. Item G1 is to adopt Regulation 614, establishing the 2025 annual general adjustment in the amount of 1.62% for tenancies commencing prior to September 1, 2024. There are no speakers on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the staff report.
This is Charles Oshaniga, General Counsel. Good evening, Chair Tipton and members of the Rent Board. There is no presentation for this particular item. This is just the AGA, the Annual General Adjustment, that we are required to announce every year. Typically, we put it on the consent calendar because the board really doesn't have discretion around the approval of this particular item. However, this year we decided to put it on the regular calendar just in case you all had questions. I think there are some new board members and this might be their first time experiencing an annual general adjustment. Just for all your information, the public's information, the annual general adjustment for 2025 is 1.62%. That's 60% of the actual consumer price indexed. And within the agenda, you can reference attachment 2, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index table, and that's where we pull the percentages from. Then you just take 60% of that for 2025, and you'll get 1.62. And there it is. So open staff can answer any questions that the board members have. Otherwise, staff is requesting that the board members adopt Regulation 614, establishing the 2025 annual general adjustment in the amount of 1.62%. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Are there any questions from members of the board? Seeing no questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers, if any.
There are no speakers on this item.
You mentioned, Council, that the board, this isn't really an issue where the board has discretion. So do we need a motion here?
I can make a motion.
Please go ahead.
I make a motion that we adopt Regulation 614, establishing the 2025 annual general adjustment in the amount of 1.62% for tenancies commencing prior to September 1st, 2024.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Board Member
Madam
Height?
Clerk, let's take a vote.
Yes. Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor?
Yes.
And Chair Tipton?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item H1 under Rent Board as a whole. Item H1, staff recommends that the Rent Board authorize replenishing the reserves to a minimum of 18% of current year budgeted expenditures for the operating and stability reserves as described in the reserve policy. There are no speakers on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the staff report, if there is one.
Good evening, Chair Tipton and members of the board. I'm Fred Tran, the Deputy Director of the Rent Program, and this evening I will be presenting the reserve policy. I'll begin the presentation by providing some background and brief history on the reserve policy. Section 11.100.060M states the board shall be an integral part of the government of the city and shall exercise its powers and duties independently from the city council, city manager, and city attorney, except by request of the rent board. The rent ordinance ensures the integrity and autonomy of the rent board. The rent ordinance vests the rent board with the sole power to oversee and adopt its own budget. The rent program budget is comprised of reasonable and necessary expenses to administer the rent ordinance. The budget is funded annually by the housing fees charged to the landlords. In April of 2020, per the board's recommendation and the best practices presented by Kevin Harper, CPA, and associates, the board directed staff to develop a reserve policy. In January of 2021, a proposed policy was presented to the board that required a minimum reserve balance to be maintained equal to 30% of current year expenditures not to exceed 50%. During the following board meeting in February, the board directed staff to revise the policy to maintain a minimum reserve balance of 18% of current year's budgeted operations and not to exceed 25%. Next, I will discuss the three objectives of the reserve policy. First, it establishes three categories of reserves and creates a procedure and definition of those amounts within the reserves that may be used. Secondly, it requires that any amount of the reserves spent must be replenished. Third, it states a maximum cap on the total amount of reserves that can be held at one time and requires that any amount in excess of the reserve balance maximum of that cap be used to reduce future housing fees. The following are the three categories of reserves and their respective target levels. The first reserve level presented is the operating and stability reserve. The rent board shall maintain year-end contingency reserve balances of a minimum of 18% of current year budgeted expenditures. The purpose of the operating and stability reserve is to provide fiscal stability and mitigate loss of service delivery and financial risks associated with unexpected revenue shortfalls during a single fiscal year or during a prolonged recessionary period. The next category is the catastrophic legal event reserve. Its purpose is to offset unforeseen legal costs that exceed current allocated legal fees. Should an unforeseen lawsuit be brought against the rent board that results in the board owing fees or costs that exceed those legal expenditures provided for in the annual budget, the executive director or their designee shall have the authority to approve catastrophic legal event reserve appropriations. However, the executive director's or the designee's approval of use of their reserve shall not automatically result in disbursement of said funds. Subject to the principles of attorney-client privilege and the Brown Act, the executive director or their designee approval must be certified by a majority of the rent board members at a notice board meeting. The certification shall be accompanied by a budget amendment confirming the nature of the emergency and authorization of that appropriation in the reserves fund. Third, the reserve category is the catastrophic reserve. The purpose of the reserve is to mitigate costs associated with unforeseen emergencies such as disasters or catastrophic events. Should an unforeseen event occur that requires the expenditure of the rent board's resource beyond those provided in the annual budget, the executive director or their designee shall have the same authority to approve appropriations and request of the use of the disbursements similar to the catastrophic legal event reserves. Should any catastrophic event occur, required reserve levels of 50% of any remaining reserve balance after the operating and stability reserve is sufficiently funded should be adequate to meet the rent board's financial needs. Here's the financial projection for this current fiscal year end. The projection suggests that the rent program be able to satisfy the proposed target reserve balance at the end of the fiscal year. This chart also presents the starting balance of fiscal year 25-26, net of the contributions to be estimated at $614,507. A contribution in the amount of $51,176 is proposed to be to funded the operating reserve to meet its current year balance. Staff member have coordinated with the finance department to create sub-accounts within the rent program special revenue fund to maintain the three reserve funds. If replenishing the reserve funds are approved, presented are the balances after contributions are made to each reserve. The recommended action. Staff recommends that the rent board authorize replenishing reserves to a minimum of 18% of current year budgeted expenditures for the operating and stability reserve as described in the reserve policy. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board? Seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call public speakers, if any.
There are no speakers on this item.
Is there a motion? Oh, excuse me, the recommended action.
I can make a motion.
Perfect, thank you.
So my motion is that we authorize replenishing reserves to a minimum of 18% of current year budgeted expenditures for the operating and stability reserve, and the maximum remaining for the catastrophic legal event reserve and catastrophic reserve as described in the reserve policy.
Have a second?
I second.
Okay. I'll take a vote. Board Member Espinosa,
Yes.
Board Member Height,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor,
Yes.
Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item I, under budget. Item I is to, 1, adopt revised fiscal year 2025 through 26 rent program budget. 2, receive and approve fiscal year 2025 through 26 rental housing fee study. And 3, direct staff to prepare a resolution consistent with the rent board's approved rental housing fee study and budget, recommending to the City Council adoption of a 2-tier fee structure for fiscal year 2025 through 26 of $267 for fully covered rental units and $151 for partially covered rental units. There are no speakers on this item.
Thank you. Is there a staff report?
Good evening. Good evening, Chair Tipton, members of the Rent Board. Nicholas Traylor, Executive Director, presenting on the proposed fiscal year 2025-26 budget and fee study. Tonight's issue is the rent ordinance's requirement that the board hold a public hearing and adopt an annual budget for the upcoming fiscal year no later than July 1st. The annual budget is funded by the residential rental housing fee, the amount of which is determined by the City Council following a recommendation from the Rent Board. In consideration of this requirement, staff members have prepared proposed fiscal year 2025-26 budget and fee study and provided the Rent Board with a prior draft 10-year financial projection for its consideration and comment. The purpose of this item is to adopt the proposed fiscal year 2025-26 rent program budget prior to the July 1st deadline and to direct staff to recommend to the City Council approval of a 2-tiered fee structure for fiscal year 2025-26 of $267 for fully covered rental units and $151 for partially covered rental units. In terms of fiscal impact, the proposed budget and rental housing fee study for the 2025-26 fiscal year would authorize $3,594,258 in expenses and $3,694,258 in revenues. The proposed rental housing fee for the 2025-26 fiscal year is $267 for fully covered rental units and $151 for partially covered rental units. So the three main goals that inform the rent program budget are program development, outreach and education, and program stability and compliance. As is required by law, the proposed fiscal year 25-26 goals are aligned with the mission of the rent program, which is to promote neighborhood and community stability, healthy housing, and affordability for Richmond tenants through the regulating of those landlord-tenant matters that reasonably relate to rents and evictions while maintaining a landlord's right to a fair return. The fiscal year 2025-26 budget continues to support staffing levels and training and support to effectively administer and enforce the Richmond rent ordinance. As such, existing and new staff require adequate support in terms of training related to the rent ordinance, rent regulations, administrative procedures, database training, and landlord-tenant dispute resolution to resolve disputes related to the regulation of rents and evictions. Program development also means providing sufficient staffing levels to develop more efficient processes, mostly related to developing online services, including online property enrollment, tenancy registration, the filing of rent and eviction notices with the rent program, filing petitions, and scheduling appointments. Finally, in fiscal year 2025-26, the rent program budget supports avoiding and resolving rent and eviction legal disputes between landlords and tenants through its contract with Project Sentinel, which provides a half-time attorney who provides legal guidance to both landlords and tenants. Since its inception in February and April of 2025, the Landlord-Tenant Legal Services Program has served 20 participants. The fiscal year 2025-26 budget also provides funding for outreach and education, both vital activities that promote enforcement of the rent ordinance. To support outreach and education, the budget includes funding the Public Information and Enrollment Unit and other organizational units that conduct outreach and education activities. Those activities include publicizing and distributing the comprehensive Know Your Rights Guide to Rent Control, 4 mass mailings to landlords and tenants, fact sheets, infographic videos, webinars, tabling at community events, and remote and in-person workshops. The budget also supports targeted outreach, mainly through our community canvassing efforts, tabling at community events, and going to various community centers and sites, including affordable housing properties and other community groups that directly serve a high volume of renters. Targeted outreach also includes developing systems to produce and send out notices to landlords and tenants of controlled rental units, informing them of the maximum allowable rents. And finally, after having previously funded a tenant survey, the budget includes $10,000 to fund a landlord survey to improve how the agency serves the rental property owner community. The fiscal year 2025-26 budget also supports the collection of the rental housing fee, which funds the agency. Towards that end, the budget includes funding for a compliance-focused rent program services analyst to increase collections and the discovery of previously unrecorded and unbilled rental units. The budget also provides funding to adequately staff our front desk and for those staff that handle our intake, our appointment scheduling, and customer service. To sustain itself long-term and support its compliance activities, the rent program and the city have approved a cooperation agreement waiving the cost pool charges that were unstable on the rent program in lieu of the rent program's administration of certain city ordinances that work to enhance and enforce the rent ordinance. Finally, the rent program budget supports adequate staffing to continue developing and improving the rent program's new IMS database. Perhaps the most consequential technical tool necessary for the agency in terms of administering and enforcing the rent ordinance is the rent program database and customer relations system. As mentioned in the last slide, the board's approval and direction at the May 18th regular meeting of the rent board to budget for the hiring of a compliance-focused rent program services analyst works to effectuate program sustainability and compliance. The compliance-focused rent program services analyst supports enhanced collection of the rental housing fee by identifying, investigating, and billing previously unreported rental units, increasing internal efforts to collect outstanding fees, leading billing, registration, and compliance-related outreach projects, providing counseling, outreach, and education services, potentially assisting with new housing-related city ordinances that enhance compliance. And this position will also help effectuate increased revenue collection and fees, sustaining higher long-term fee collection rates, and supporting, as well as supporting the program's core services. The recruitment it will begin in the first quarter of 25-26. The recruitment will begin and is estimated to begin in the first quarter of 25-26 for hiring of one FTE rent program services analyst. So to support a stable agency and retain talented staff and fulfill program goals, the budget includes funds for staff promotions. Those promotions include moving a Rent Program Services Analyst 1 to a Rent Program Services Analyst 2 due to increased skills and experience, promoting an Administrative Assistant to an Administrative Services Coordinator to expanded administrative duties across all units, and advancing a step increase for the agency's Senior Administrative Analyst. The fiscal year 2025 budget is also informed by the updated salaries associated with the city's class and comp study and per union agreements, which are still being negotiated. However, typically the discussions on new MOUs and salary adjustments begin with similar terms as the existing agreements, with additional negotiations to finalize those agreements. Additionally, salary increases commonly will be retroactive to the beginning of the agreements, which would be effective July 1st, 2025. To budget for the fiscal year 25-26 salaries, staff utilized the same annual step increases for SEIU Local 1021 and IFPTE Local 21 Mid-Management, and 1% to 5% merit increases for IFPTE Local 21 Executive Managers. Staff also budgeted a cost of living increase of 4% effective January 1st, 2026 for all three bargaining units. Now in front of you is the rent program's amended organizational chart to reflect the addition of the compliance-focused rent program services analyst, and the staff promotions. The proposed fiscal year 25-26 rent program budget funds $3,594,258 in expenses. Of those expenses, $2,092,841,000 is allocated for salaries and wages, $1,023,511 in fringe benefits and workers' comp, $390,606 for professional and administrative services, hospital charges that are netted to zero, $77,300 for other operating expenses, $9,500 for supplemental liability insurance, and $500 for utilities. To fund rent program expenses, the rent ordinance requires all landlords pay a residential rental housing fee, and those fees are then recommended by the board to the city council for approval. Now, fees must align with Government Code 50076 and are based on the estimated cost to administer the rent program. The fee supports personnel, risk management, central service department support, IT systems, outreach and education, and professional services. A key denominator in determining the rental housing fees are the number of recorded and billed rental units. Between fiscal year 2023-24 and 24-25, the number of fully covered rental units dropped from 7,857 to 7,612, and the number of partially covered units dropped from 10,485 to 10,372. The proposed fiscal year 25-26 fees are two-tiered and are determined by taking the budget and dividing it between those units that are fully covered and those that are partially covered by the rent ordinance. The 7,612 fully covered units pay into all program service activities or general administration, as well as eviction regulation and rent regulation services. Whereas the 10,372 partially covered units only pay into the general administrative and eviction-related services. The total proposed revenues for fiscal year 2025-26 amount to $3,694,258, a 9% increase in fees compared to last year. From this chart, you can see rental housing fees, fee amounts since 2017. Over the last two fiscal years, fees have increased primarily due to salary increases associated with the city's class and comp study and overcoming a backlog of administrative determinations of inapplicability or exemption, which has resulted in fewer applicable and covered rental units. So key to the long-term stability of the rent program budget is the cost pool cooperation agreement, which was approved by the board on May 18th, 2025, and approved by the City Council on June 17th, 2025. The cooperation agreement results in cost pool charges to the rent program being netted to zero in lieu of services performed by the rent program for the city. So the recommended action tonight is to adopt the revised fiscal year 2025-26 rent program budget, receive and approve fiscal year 2025-26 rental housing fee study, and direct staff to prepare a resolution consistent with the rent board's approved rental housing fee study and budget, recommending to the City Council adoption of a two-tiered fee structure for fiscal year 2025-26 of $267 for fully covered rental units and $151 for partially covered rental units. And with that, myself and Fred Tran are available for any questions that the board may have.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board?
How come I'm just curious, how come there's 358 minus 358?
So that is a good question. As I mentioned in the slide that explains why the fee is going up, one of the main factors, other than the salary increases that have taken place citywide, including the rent program, is that between 2022 and now, we had a pretty big backlog of requests to either exempt a unit from the rent ordinance or to claim that it's not applicable, meaning it's not a rental unit. For example, it's rent-free or owner-occupied. So we had well over 100, I think close to 200 of those administrative determinations that we had a backlog. And so during that time period, those units were under review and suspected rental units. So we did count those units in our database. We have cleared that backlog thanks to the great work of our rent program services analyst and our senior administrative staff. And so that's one of the main causes. There is also a loss of partially covered units, less so. And some of that might be the result of the changing economic situation where landlords who have previously held on to their investment properties and rented them out have been selling them. We have a project called the New Owners Outreach Project where we reach out to any property owner that is new to Richmond, informing them that there's a rent ordinance and that this property may have been a rental in the past. And in many cases, we find out that those units that were previously rentals, for example, a condominium or a single-family home that was rented, is now owner-occupied. So those are the two main reasons I think we've seen a decrease in the rental unit count.
Thank you, Board Member Height, because I think most or all of us had that exact same question. Are there any further questions from the board?
Just wanted to say quick congratulations about the cost pool agreement getting approved. I know that that's been many years in the making, and it's a great benefit to the entire program. So great job, team.
Thank you very much. I'm trying very hard to hold back my enthusiasm for that compliment. Thank you.
And since there don't seem to be further questions from the board, I'll just note that we've discussed this extensively at the prior several meetings. Yes.
Yo solo sigo teniendo una sugerencia y tal vez corríjanme si estoy mal.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. I just have a quick question.
Les he pedido que los volantes que sacan no solo sean en español y en inglés, sino en otros idiomas, pero yo nunca los he visto más que solo en español y en inglés.
I have requested for the flyers to be sent out to the community in more than 2 languages, not just English and Spanish, but every flyer that I've seen, they're only in these 2 languages.
Ahora somos una comunidad más diversa y necesitamos que estos volantes están poniéndose aquí, pero nunca los he visto en otros idiomas.
And since our community is being more diverse, I would really appreciate it if we can honor the other communities, other languages, to also be included in the flyers.
Si los tienen, ¿me los podrían hacer llegar, por favor?
If you have these flyers with more than 2 languages, could you please send them to me?
Thank you, Board Member Espinoza. We certainly hear what you're saying, and I agree that it would be good to expand our outreach to more than just the Spanish-speaking and English communities. Ultimately, some of that may result in some increased costs, but we'll have to determine what that may be. And ultimately, the board will, if it's a financial decision, the board will make a decision around that. But we do, all of our outreach has been in English and Spanish, but we certainly can look into expanding that.
Can we just put out a flyer like, I think the county does that where they have like, they list all the languages with just, a simple thing saying if you're seeing this in a language you don't understand, you can call us,
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. So one thing that we do have is simultaneous interpretation for our counseling sessions. So if you speak a language other than English or Spanish and you would like to receive counseling services, you can call, and we call interpreters unlimited, who usually they're the ones that handle most of the remote translation services, and we can conduct our counseling in that language.
Bueno, sí he escuchado eso y también lo que es...
I have heard that before, however.
La cuestión aquí, que también pusieron que van a hacer una encuesta a los arrendadores.
The thing is that you had mentioned sending out a survey to our property or owners.
Pero también llevo desde que empecé aquí como miembro del board diciendo que me encantaría que hicieran una encuesta a todos en general.
But since I've been here on the board, I would really like this survey to be sent out to everyone in general.
Porque siempre he dicho que, bueno, la gente, yo estoy en la comunidad y he escuchado otras cosas muy diferentes a lo que vengo aquí a la junta y escucho.
Because since I go out to the community, it's very different what I'm hearing from the community to what I'm hearing here in the board.
Entonces, si podíamos tal vez en algún momento hacer esa encuesta sería importante para ver de qué áreas podemos mejorar.
So I would really appreciate if we can prepare this survey to send it out to everyone in general to see what else we can improve.
Thank you, Board Member Espinoza. We have conducted a tenant survey, the results of which we plan to present at the next, either the July or August meeting. So we have finally conducted all of the analysis of that survey, and that the survey didn't go out to everybody in Richmond because generally surveys only handle a smaller pool because of the cost associated with doing a very, very large survey like that. But we do have all of the raw data from that survey, which we plan to present to the board in the coming months. So we have done a tenant survey already, and the results are going to be presented soon.
Was that survey offered in languages other than English and Spanish?
Yes. You received a postcard, and if you didn't speak English, you could elect to answer the questions in other languages. So it wasn't just in English, yes.
Great, yeah, so it could be helpful when presenting the information to the board at the coming meeting to include that breakdown of like what languages
Yes.
Respondents chose when they
Okay,
answered.
yeah, and that is part of the analysis. We've
Okay.
actually put the whole report, the draft report together, and it's queued up to go before you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions from the board, Madam Clerk, please call public speakers, if any.
There are no speakers on this item.
Is there a motion?
I can make a motion. I make a motion that we adopt the revised fiscal year 2025-2026 rent program budget, that we approve the fiscal year 25-26 rental housing fee study, and that we direct staff to prepare a resolution recommending to the City Council adoption of a two-tier fee structure for fiscal year 25-26 of $267 for fully covered rental units and $151 for partially covered rental units.
Is there a second?
I second.
I'll take a vote. Board Member Espinosa,
Yes.
Board Member Height,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor,
Yes.
and Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay. Let me go back to where I was at. Okay, the next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar. I'll read the list of consent calendar items. Item F1 is to approve the minutes of April 16, 2025, regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Item F2 is to approve the minutes of May 28, 2025, special meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Item F3 is to receive the fiscal year 2024 through 25 monthly activity report through May 2025. Item F4 is to receive the rent program fiscal year 2024 through 25 monthly revenue and expenditure report through May 2025. Item F5 is to approve an amendment to the contract for community legal services with the Eviction Defense Center, increasing the contract amount by $200,000 for fiscal year 2025 through 26 to a total not to exceed $1,181,000. I'm sorry, yeah, $81 and I'm sorry, I'm all off. $1,181,244 and modifying the term to commence on July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. Item F6 is to approve an amendment to the contract for translation services with the Spanish Group LLC, increasing the contract amount by $19,000 for fiscal year 2025 through 26 to a total not to exceed $67,600 for fiscal year 2025 through 26. July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. Item F7, approve an amendment to the contract for legal services with Project Sentinel, increasing the contract amount by $75,000 for fiscal year 2025 through 26 to a total not to exceed $150,000 and modifying the term to commence on July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. Item F8 is to approve an amendment to the contract for interpretation services with Interpreters Unlimited, increasing the contract by $15,000 for fiscal year 2025 through 26 to a total not to exceed $62,000 and modifying the term to commence on July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. And item F9 is to approve a contract amendment with interpretation services interpretation services with accent on languages with the payment limit not to exceed $26,200 for fiscal year 2025 through 26 for July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. Whew, it was a lot. Sorry, I was getting tongue-tied. I couldn't. It's a lot to read.
And is it correct that we address these
Separately or whatever?
cumulatively?
It's up to you.
or-
I don't know.
Right, this is consent calendar, so we can just make a single motion to approve the consent
I
calendar.
don't know how you do it.
Great.
Can they break them up, or do they have to do it all in one?
Is there any need to break them up? Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, I think we would have had to have done that at agenda review.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion. I make a motion that we do the consent calendar.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Take a vote?
It was Vice Chair Cantor who seconded? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'll take a vote. Board Member Espinosa?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
Vice Chair Cantor,
Yes.
and Chair Tipton.
Yes.
Motion passes to approve the consent calendar unanimous. Ooh, we got through that one. Jesus. The next item on the agenda is reports of officers. Item J, I didn't change it on here. Are there any reports from officers?
The only thing to report to the board is that we will be at the Juneteenth Festival at Nickel Park this weekend on Saturday between 10 and I believe 4. So we will be there tabling with many other city organizations, and maybe we'll see you out there. That's it.
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned at 5:58 PM.
5:58.
Thank
We
you.
have a record.